Jack Smith is fighting back. He does not want cameras in his courtroom when he goes to trial in Washington, D.C. or in Florida against Donald Trump. He just filed what's called an opposed motion for leave to file a reply in opposition to defendants' response to applications to broadcast the criminal trial of the United States versus Trump. What does all that mean? So here we are. There's a kind of a side civil action happening parallel or adjacent to the Washington, D.C. case in front of Judge Tanya Chutkan, where a couple of or several media companies have brought an action, a civil action, to try and get cameras in the courtroom or audio recording or an audio broadcast, I should say, in the courtroom, so that they can broadcast the upcoming trial that's scheduled for March 4th, 2024, where Donald Trump tried to steal the election, the Washington, D.C. case. So this was brought by, it's called In Re Media Application for Audiovisual Access to Trial Proceedings in the United States of America versus Donald Trump, as well as In Re Application of NBC Universal Media to permit video and audio trial proceedings in the United States versus Trump. So it's very interesting that you have these media groups that are trying to get access, and they filed a several-page motion basically asking for permission. And it was unclear what Jack Smith was going to do. He filed a motion in opposition for it, and we'll talk about what he said and why in a minute. But what just happened recently is he caught Donald Trump's lawyers in a lie. They lied. And he filed what was basically permission. He basically said, you know, Judge, I know you set a motion schedule where we get to respond and then reply to a respond, right? But if you want to submit yet another response, you have to seek permission. And that's what Jack Smith is asking for. He's saying, essentially, can we please supplement our November 3rd opposition application? And the reason he gave, he basically said, now I'm going to read this, it's a quote. He said, when we filed our opposition to the applications of this coalition of media organizations seeking to record and broadcast the criminal trial of Trump, in advance, the government, and this is very common, lawyers are required to do this. It's called meet and can confer, or they basically say, what's your position? And I'm going to highlight that for the court. So I can say whether it's an opposed motion or an unopposed motion. Judges like to know that. And they like to know, is this something that both parties are asking for, or only one party? So it's very common for lawyers to do that. And it says here, in advance, the government sought the defendant's position on cameras in the courtroom, right? And counsel requested, meaning defense counsel, okay? Counsel requested that the government represent to the court that they took no position, which means we have no position one way or another. We're not for it. We're not against it. We take no position on the separate action being brought by media companies, a separate civil action being brought by media companies under the First Amendment and transparency and open public courtrooms. And this is something that has a lot of public interest. They want to broadcast it. And so Donald Trump represented to Jack Smith's team that they're not going to take any position. The government accurately reported that to the court. On November 10th, however, 7 days later, the defendant reversed course and filed a response in support of the applications of the media companies. The response did not engage with the relevant law or any rules or case law, and instead made, quote, false and incendiary claims about the administration of his criminal case. So therefore, the government's requesting an opportunity to respond to the defendant's claims and is prepared to reply with 4 pages, just 4 pages, not a lengthy criminal filing, immediately upon receiving leave from the court. That means Jack Smith's people, they have their 4-page motion ready. They're signaling to the court, if you give us permission to file because they lied and they gave misleading statements, we have our 4 pages ready that we are willing to file with the court. The government asked the defendant for his position on this request, meaning this, can we reply again? The government asked how do you feel about that now that you have misrepresented? How do you feel about us doing this? And the defendant objects. He says, I don't want you to be able to do that. NBC Universal, who's one of the plaintiffs trying to get access, they do not object to the government being able to file a supplement to the response. However, the Media Coalition has said they want an opportunity to address any issues raised by the government's reply in their reply, which is due November 17th. So they don't object to the government having more time so long as the government files it by November 14th, which means, because I'm recording this on November 13th, that Jack Smith is hoping that the judge will today or tomorrow rule on this and give him an opportunity to file his 4 pages because he wants to supplement his opposition that he filed to cameras in the courtroom, which was an 18-page filing, which I have to say, this is one of the times, probably one of the few times, that I actually strenuously object or disagree, I should say, with the special counsel's position here. And I actually agree with the defendant, Donald Trump's position that there should be cameras in the courtroom. Now, what Jack Smith does in his filing, the Office of the Special Counsel, what they do in their 18-page filing is they basically cite the law. Okay, they say, look, and the law is crystal clear. There are no cameras allowed or broadcasting allowed in federal court. And he basically gives the law in detail. He says, look, there's Rule 53 of the Federal Rules of Civil Procedure and Local Rule 53.1.1, citing that the Judicial Conference, and I'll explain what that is in a minute, has always rejected this. And citing the law, the government says this is essentially what it's required. So let's look at what Rule 53 says. Under the Federal Rules of Criminal Procedure, quote, the court must not permit the taking of photographs in the courtroom during judicial proceedings or the broadcasting of judicial proceedings from the courtroom unless a statute or other rule provides otherwise. Federal Rule of Criminal Procedure 53, Local Rule 53.1.1 expands on Rule 53's broadcast prohibition, stating that the taking of photographs and operation of tape recorders inside the United States courthouse and radio and television broadcasting from inside the courthouse during progress of or in connection with the judicial proceeding, including proceedings before magistrates, whether or not the court's actually in session, are prohibited. A judge may, however, permit the use of electronic or photographic means for the presentation of evidence or the perpetuation of a record, and the broadcasting, televising, recording, or photographing of investiture, ceremonial, or naturalization proceedings. Contents of official tapes that are made as part of the official record in a case will be treated in the same manner as the official stenographic notes. So basically what this is saying is, look, if you're about to become a United States citizen or there's some other ceremony going on, a judge maybe is being sworn in, things like that, then you can broadcast that or record that because that's ceremonial. But anything else, or you're also allowed as a lawyer, you can bring your devices in with explicit permission from the court. I've actually had to get a court order from a judge in a federal court allowing me to bring my computer and my phone in because I use that. My entire law practice I do on my computer. I'm cloud-based, and that's how many lawyers practice now. And so you have to get permission to do that for your work in a case. Sometimes you want to also, in a trial, you have something on your laptop that you want to broadcast to the screen. You can bring your device in that way, but that's it. There are very, very, very few exceptions. The press and reporters are often allowed to type on their computer, but they're not allowed to record or broadcast what's going on. So they're very, very strict rules. Now, who makes these rules? There's something called the Judicial Conference. Okay, that's capital J, capital C, the Judicial Conference. And they are a policy-making arm of the federal court system. And what they do is they basically make the rules, and they make the rules. It's authorized, by law. They're a separate advisory committee that basically decides how this works. And in 1990, they studied this, and they allowed the courts to change the rules for the ceremonial proceedings that we just talked about. But before that, they weren't allowed at all. And they tested it out. They did what do you call it? Where you the word is escaping me. They did a pilot program where they allowed, for some civil cases, they allowed there to be cameras in the courtroom to see how it would go. And after the end, and this is in 1990, at the end of their pilot program, they decided, you know what, we're not going to allow this. We're just going to allow it for these, naturalization or other ceremonial proceedings. Okay, fine. And their reasoning was, they said the intimidating effect of cameras on some witnesses and jurors remained a concern, and so they declined to allow any changes. And then 6 years later, in 1996, the Judicial Conference changed and allowed the broadcasting of appellate arguments. Now, in appellate arguments, that's just where there's lawyers and judges talking. There's no witnesses. So they did allow for the broadcasting of appellate arguments, but no other changes have been made except during the pandemic, where the Judicial Conference approved of a temporary exception to allow judges to use teleconference technology to give access to proceedings while the public access was restricted. So the public could broadcast in and defendants could broadcast in for certain court proceedings. And I actually participated in many of them remotely, where I was the lawyer in one place, the defendant was in another place, and the judge was in court, actually. But that exception ended September 21st, 2023. So very recently. And now the only place you're allowed to have any broadcasting is in civil or bankruptcy proceedings. You can have remote audio access only, and only when a witness is not testifying. But in criminal cases, you cannot. So that's what the law is. And the government was very clear, and they stated the law clearly. And I agree with the government that this is what the law says. But what I disagree with is they shouldn't have taken a position. They shouldn't have said, so therefore we are asking you not to allow cameras in the courtroom. The judge doesn't need, they should have said, we take no position. Judge, if you know what the law is crystal clear. You can read the law. You don't need any help from me to file this and to tell you what the law is. And, why did they take a position? I mean, look, I've been to high profile cases as a spectator, and there are broadcast is allowed for an overflow room, right? So because there wasn't enough people allowed in the courtroom. So I sat in an overflow room and I watched something on a screen. I watched the entire proceeding on a screen, including witness testimony. So why is that okay sitting in a room? What makes that so special that you're sitting in a courtroom? Why is it that I can't watch it from the comfort of my own home? I just think this is a ridiculous, antiquated law that was from the 1990s. They looked at it. It was the last time they looked at it. We live in a different world now. Now we live in a world where everything is recorded, and people are used to having their face on TV, or I shouldn't even say on TV, but on a device, or, it's like the great equalizer, the internet. I mean, look at me. I'm just a lawyer, and I have a podcast, and I'm talking to you here, broadcast from my own living room. I mean, we're just live in a different world. I just think that Jack Smith really should allow this. As they say, the best disinfectant is sunlight, and I agree with that. Donald Trump loves to make speeches in between court proceedings, and he loves to say things happened that didn't happen. And frankly, he lies. It's one thing to disagree when you watch the Republican debate, you've got people up there who are actually debating issues, and you can agree with them, disagree with them. That makes democracy, that makes our world go around. But when you're not even dealing in the truth, when it's all about lies, that's where you're not really having a debate. You're not having a real conversation. You are being misled by lies. And so I really think that the only way to do this is going to be to have cameras in the courtroom. I mean, the January 6th committee, they did a whole, they recorded everybody, and then they broadcast it for the world to see. I mean, is anyone, intimidated or upset by that? I just don't understand what we're trying to protect here. And Jack Smith goes on and on to talk about how, the First Amendment's not violated, and this is not related to content, which is true, because it's every single time someone wants to have a camera in the courtroom, they say no, it's not specific to any particular content. And he says, he gives the law of what it is. He says, we have to ensure a fair trial. That must be upheld and maintained at all costs. Knowledge of being televised might cause the judge, jurors, or witnesses to be distracted, whether by embarrassment, self-consciousness, anxiety, or desire to be a star. That just feels like tired old reasoning. And I just think we live in a different world now. And so it's a policy question. The Judicial Conference has studied the issue for decades. They haven't come up with the times. And I just really think that Jack Smith shouldn't have taken a position, but he did. And so we'll see what ends up happening. I think it's very clear they're not going to allow cameras in the courtroom because the Judicial Conference doesn't allow it. And I think the judge is going to say she's bound by that. But I do think they should reconsider, not just for this case, but for all cases where there's a strong media interest. I'm Karen Friedman Agnifilo from Legal AF. Join me and my co-hosts every Wednesday and Saturday. Thanks so much for joining.
Hey, Meidas Mighty. Love this report? Continue the conversation by following us on Instagram @MeidasTouch to keep up with the most important news of the day. What are you waiting for? Follow us now.